Dr. Bergner got her Ph.D. with Peter Osorio in 1975, and then moved with Ray to Normal, Illinois, and embarked on her practice of finding the abnormal in normal and doing private practice. Earlier in her career, she did a lot of consulting with different agencies like the police, but I think more recently she has emphasized more with individuals and families and more of the clinical side or the consulting side of practice. But you know what has been a through line, to use Lynn Schwartz's term, travel and photography. Anybody follows her on Instagram, she has the most amazing travel portraiture. Her ability to get people all over the world to pose for amazing pictures is just remarkable. I think good to get a picture of a blade of grass or a flower. People know. So she's remarkable with that. She's been quite active in terms of things like legal and voters. And I think the talk itself just comes from her perspective as she's been through life and thinking like I certainly have. You know, there's I've lived more of life than I have left to live, and what does that do in my life? In fact, I'm actually taking an online course called Year Live. It comes out of a meditation center in California by a guy named Stephen Levine, and really has conceptualized a year about what's it like to have a year to live. So I can certainly relate to this. Anyway, Laurie's also a bike rider. Despite the flatness of things and the lack of challenge that Illinois poses, she does that as well. With that said, let me turn things over to Dr. Bergner. It's about 11:30, and we will proceed on the timing and try and give you your time back that anytime we go off, and then move into the panel discussion, which will push us a little further off schedule, but not too far. Thank you, Dr. Bergner.
Okay, well, greetings from sunny corn country, not where I planned on being, but here I am. And that's one good thing that Kobe gave us from Zoom, that this is not a done deal here. I can still do this from Zoom. So first I want to thank a few people that I talked to on and off about this presentation. My husband, Ray, Walter Torres, and Ralph. They all gave me some really interesting things to add to it, so I want to thank them all. And I'm going to read this. I really hate to read, but I'm going to. So this is a very personal presentation, or at least I can say it was motivated by personal interest and meaning, and I can imagine it has a very personal relevance to many listening. At first, I conceived of this presentation as definitely not being about death. It's about how we adjust and cope and manage the changes that the last couple of decades of our lives bring, putting aside the issues of serious physical and mental decline and of others close to us. So I saw this as being about life, not death. But as I developed it, I realized it's actually all about all about death, in the sense that it's about how we face the fact that death is coming up faster and faster, that life and death are inextricably interwoven. Our lives have always been affected by where we see ourselves in the course of our lives, but especially in the last chapters of life, there's the realization that we faced greatly increased restriction of the time we have left. We're all aware throughout our lives of where we are in the book of life. Interestingly, I think teenagers are often acutely aware for some reason. When I was in high school, I collected every concert ticket, every high school sports game ticket, every party favor, because I wanted to remember it all, aware of how fast it was going by and would never be the same. Perhaps the other time in my life when I had an acute sense of the passing of life was when I had children and watched them grow out of being babies, then toddlers, then onward. I certainly was aware, as we all are, as each decade birthday arrives of where we are ourselves in the book of life. And what that means for us is different for each of us and changes with every decade. I think many of us, but not all, assume and assume we'll live into our 70s or 80s, perhaps even 90s. But nonetheless, we have reactions to each decade we enter, depending on the meaning that decade has for us. So some are upset to see what they see their youth in their 20s fade into the past when they turn 30. Daniel Levinson notes in The Seasons of a Man's Life that, quote, the most distressing fear in early adulthood is that there is no life after youth. Some are upset to turn 40 if it means to them that they're truly coming into middle age, or that they're losing some opportunities regarding career or families, etc. Others might be pleased to enter the 40s because they're enjoying success in their careers or enjoying parenting children of a certain age. Apparently, those aren't children who have reached adolescence yet. And as each decade becomes our past, what's possible for our future changes. Women turning 40 look at the probability of not having children or more children. Men and women often look at the passing of times in terms of what that means for better or worse, for changing careers or getting ahead in their chosen career. But of course, they're aware that their lives are about half over. But for many, turning 70 has a different meaning, on a different plane than any other up until then. It means that we are flying at warp speed toward the wall of death, which is the end of life. And so perhaps we can say that this changes our world in a different way than any other has in the past. So what does that understanding and reality mean to us? How does this change our world? A different world opens up, a different sense of time, a different sense of our place, our status in our family and our community, a different sense of what activities we want to spend our time on or that we're able to do. In short, perhaps a different sense of who we are. The signs that people have a different awareness are everywhere. It's in the times we say, life is too short. Perhaps we've said it before, but now we say it many, many times. It reflects our awareness of just that our life now seems to have much less left. That we want to make it as satisfying as possible. That we don't want to, quote, waste what's left with unsatisfying things. It's in the many times we make plans for next year, but add, that's if. If what? If nothing goes wrong that makes it impossible to do whatever it is. If we or our spouses or family gets sick or goes downhill. Some years ago, when I was only 66, I had an opportunity to take 2 big trips with big, long flights, but they were only about 2 months apart. I saw a couple of friends that were much older, and I mentioned to them, I don't know if I should really do this. And boy, they both said to me, you should go while you can. And one of them told me a story about when he was about 66 and traveled with friends a lot. And one of them at that point turned to the others and said, I wonder how long we'll be able to do this, to still travel. And they all looked at him like he was crazy. And he said, none of us can travel anymore now, so go while you can. Let me take a brief detour to clarify what I will not address in this presentation. I won't address dealing with elderly parents, dealing with serious mental and physical decline, or how religious beliefs affect people. Also, this isn't an attempt to solve the difficulty of dealing with this stage of life. It's merely exploring it, although I do look at how some people manage it better than others. I'm sticking to the more general conceptualization of different aspects of entering and living through this new world of last concepts, chapters of life. So we might think of entering this phase of life as being in another world. The concept of world is conceived here as the total psychological environment within which we conduct our lives. Pre-70s, let's say maybe even in the 80s, 50s and 60s, we live our lives mostly with the sense that we have, as someone put it, an endless series of tomorrows. We have a future that might include career, time with friends, working on relationships with family, travel, going to cultural events, activities that might include physical activities such as gardening and exercise. We see ourselves as having a certain place in this world, a world of work, family, community. We are still working toward different things. Time with family, improving any problematic relationships with our families, looking forward to doing some things we haven't had the time or money to do early in our lives, enjoying our friends. And then, whammo, we turn the page of the book of life, and it says chapter 7. Ray tells me this is really chapter 8, but sorry, for me, 70 is chapter 7. We stare at it, chapter 7, and we know there's only 1 or 2 or maybe 3 chapters left, and we don't know how they will be. Suddenly our future, whatever future is left, looks very different. For many, the trajectory of our lives was working toward things, many things. And even though for some time now it hasn't been on the same upward trajectory it used to be, perhaps even a gradual decline, in the 70s it begins to feel like a much faster and steeper decline. Or at least if it isn't yet, we expect it to be. Actually, we know it will be. If there are things we still want to do, to accomplish, there's suddenly very little time left to do them. We notice that our friends retire and move away or get sick, go downhill, and even a few might begin dying around us. Perhaps even ourselves or our spouses, if we have spouses, are dealing with mental and physical declines. We notice how our own faces and bodies change, and not for the better. And we can see that people look at us differently, or not at all. We see that whatever physical activities we've been doing is now going more slowly or gets interrupted by other issues. We have back problems that mean we can't garden like we used to. Some people find that in groups they are ignored, with people gravitating to talk to younger people. One friend told me that at 60 she felt she became invisible to the world. Ray's mother in her 90s, deaf and mostly blind, said the hardest thing about being so old was that she had no future. So how does this sense of a different world affect how we live, how we view ourselves and our lives? Of course, as always, it depends. It's different for different people. Not only do our personal differences influence how we're affected and how we navigate these years, but of course, our circumstances also lead to differences. Retirement can be a relief to some people, an opportunity to leave work they don't love or are just ready to leave, and to do things they wanted to do with this newfound free time. Others miss meaningful work and or the status they've had as worker, and they don't have other things that fill the void for them with meaning and interests. Or those things lead them with a diminished status. This presentation is an attempt to look at the kind of meanings that those last chapters of life have for people and the ways that people adjust, respond to, navigate, and manage those chapters. There are no statistics, so this is only my thinking and those of others, and my experience with friends, clients, and others as we all experience aging together. It's also based on some books by people who interviewed people about the way they've thought about and acted on the passing of their lives. Most particularly Daniel Levinson's The Seasons of a Man's Life, which I highly recommend. I want to start with a remembered comment by Pete Osorio. It goes something like this. I can't remember it exactly. Getting older involves a lot of losses, so we better enjoy or make use of the perks that come with it. Another way that I've expressed it is the trick of life, throughout life actually, whether it be close relationships of all kinds, or work or aging, is to accept the losses and disappointments and appreciate what we do have. I know, easier said than done. So let me share my screen. Okay. So this brings us to Pete Osorio's coping package.
Yes.
Can you see it? You can only get certain things from certain things. If you want something, go to where you can get it, not to where you aren't going to get it. You have to respect what is there in order to get out of it what there is to be gotten out of it. You run into trouble if you try to make things what they are not. You won't get what there is there to get. You won't get what there is there. And finally, perhaps most importantly for this presentation, if you adjust to what's there, then you can work with it successfully. Let's take just a minute to go over this, looking particularly at how it's relevant to turning 70. Accepting the restrictions in time left to us and in our abilities means we don't insist that we keep doing everything we've always done in exactly the same way. We aren't 25 anymore. We aren't even 50 anymore. Whatever that means in terms of losses is what is the challenge. Just as much a challenge is how to enjoy what we do have and can still do, to replace the losses, to keep us looking forward and at least enjoying what there is to enjoy in our current lives. If you adjust to what's there, then you can work with it successfully. So there's the rub, as Shakespeare would say. What exactly does it take to adjust to what's there in order to be able to work with it successfully? We have to look at what isn't there, what we have to let go of in order to talk about this damn issue of aging. And we also have to embrace other things, things that might take the place of what we lose. Again, easier said than done. What is the biggest loss of all that we're facing? Life itself. Up until now, we take for granted. If we don't do something this year, we'll do it next year. Suddenly, we stop taking that for granted. As Walter Torres says, the world really is flat. The world really is. Death, which is really about the limitation of our lives, becomes real. Before, death was true, but now it's real. Remember what Peter Osorio said, what's true is what we take to be the case. What's real is what we're prepared to act on. So death means it's actually real that we have limited time left. It's actually real that whatever our life has been up to now is pretty much what it will be most likely. Now we realize we're running out of time. So how does that realization affect people? Let me take a short detour to give you Buddha's 5 remembrances. These are the things he lists that we all have to face, all of us. I am sure to grow old. There is no way to escape old age. I am sure to become ill. There's no way to escape ill health. I'm sure to die. There's no way to escape death. All that is dear to me and to those I love will change. There's no way to escape being separated and parted from them. And finally, I'm the owner of my actions. Whatever actions I do, good or bad, of these I shall become the heir. I'm responsible for the consequences of my actions. And I take that to mean we have to live with what our lives and our actions have been, the ones we're proud of and the ones we regret. So how do people deal with facing the reality of limited time left? Again, it depends. So let's look at what it depends on. I think I could talk about our personal characteristics for a whole hour, maybe next year. So I look at 2 different things in terms of what it depends on here in terms of how people deal with things. One is our personal characteristics, and the other, the reality of our lives, certain circumstances. And I just picked out some personal characteristics that I think make a difference in how people face the reality of limited time. So one characteristic, I think, is people's tendency to accept what they have and not dwell on what they don't have. The gift of what I call a sunny personality. I have a friend whose mother lived to 102, and she just kept up an optimism and a positive thinking the whole time. And when I talked to him about it, he said, well, she really loves people, but she said in her 90s that almost all of her friends had died. So you know what? She made new friends, and they were all people in their 70s. So she just kept making new ones. So I think that's a great example of the coping package. Work with it successfully. If you can adjust to what's there, you can work with it successfully. A second thing is, I guess, what I call resilience, which I looked up the definition, the process and outcome of successfully adapting to difficult or challenging life experiences. And I would say aging definitely is one of those difficult or challenging life experiences. We can think of getting old as the next stage or event in an endless series of changes that challenge us to adjust to it. some good, some disappointing. Remember, everything changes, nothing stays the same, says Buddha. People who weren't good at adapting successfully before this probably won't be good at adapting to getting older now. My mother was a really interesting example. She was a really dynamic, energetic woman who loved going to theater, museums. She loved travel. She loved socializing with her friends. But as she got old, she got tired. She got kind of sick, a lot of medication, nothing terrible for a long time, but just always something going on. But she never seemed depressed. And when I looked at her, I thought, boy, her quality of life is just not that good. But when you talk to her, that's not how she saw it, because she focused on what she did enjoy, and she just really didn't talk about what she didn't want to, what she'd lost and couldn't do anymore. And so my perspective was different than hers versus her quality of life. And hers, of course, is the most important. I want to give you another example. Our friend and society member, Reggie Garcia, I think of him as Mr. Colorado. I think you all do, right? He's been born in Colorado. His career involved rural school systems in Colorado. He was a hiker and a camper and a mountaineer. I don't know. Oh, perfect. But he had married Betty, and she began to have some health problems. She couldn't handle the altitude anymore, and she had to move back to her hometown of Mobile, Alabama. And Reggie couldn't go there because full time, because he still had his career. So for many years, they had a long distance relationship. But several years ago, he retired. And so he moved to be with her and moved to Mobile, Alabama. And I thought to myself, oh my God, poor Reggie, losing Colorado. I can't imagine how he's going to have a decent life, whatever. I don't know. And I saw him the next year at the conference and said, Reggie, how do you like Mobile? He said, I love it. And I was just shocked. You love it. How can that be? You've lost, in my mind, you've lost everything you loved here, except for Betty, obviously. But and he said, well, and this is my memory of what he told me at the time, so it may not be perfect, but this is what hit me. He basically said, I knew that if I tried to take Colorado to Mobile and make Mobile into another Colorado, it would just be a loss. That would just be a less good Colorado, and it wouldn't be happy. So I made up my mind to make the best of what I could in what Mobile has to offer. He took up photography, became a great photographer in no time, and began to photograph events all over the community and become part of the community with that. He took up biking in the morning with a group of friends, and he was having a great time. I think that is an incredible example of what resilience is and the ability to adjust well to change. And it's relevant to any change, including getting old. A third thing that I think is really important in terms of person characteristics would be having intrinsic interests that are satisfying and meaningful to us. I think it's that keep us motivated and interested in life, and it enables us to replace some with others when needed. So if you can't do as many physical things, there's got to be other things. I'm still luckily able to do a lot of physical things, but I've taken up photography and absolutely love it. And I can probably do that, as long as I can think and see. And finally, the last one, I think, for person characteristics is the ability to have satisfying relationships. That always keeps us in good stead as we get older, and developing new ones as well is essential, I think, to dealing with getting older. A second aspect, I think, is there is a reality to our lives that makes a difference in how we face things and how we deal with them. So the circumstances of our lives, both internal and external states of affairs. So of course, an obvious one is both our mental and our physical states. And when they start going downhill, that makes a huge, huge difference in our dealing with things. I think also how much in our lives have actually objectively been and not been satisfying, how much have actually gone wrong. Some people face some pretty awful circumstances and some pretty awful losses throughout life. And of course, they're going to affect us if we have more of those than other people do. I talked to a woman recently who mentioned that her mother had abandoned the family and she never saw her mother again when she was yet a child. And of course, that's going to affect your life, and it's going to affect you even when you're old. And finally, the last two things on my list, I guess, are in terms of circumstances, are your financial situation. And if you've got a difficult one, that's going to affect how you live out your life as well and what you're able to do and the kind of time you have, which is connected. Because if you can retire and have decent financial situation, that makes you can enjoy that time a whole lot more than not. When I was in Mexico years ago, the driver that I had was, I don't know how old he was. He was really old. And he told me they had no social security and he had to do this the rest of his life, basically, because he didn't have the money to stop working. So let's talk about, there's a polarity involved here in getting older. There's advantages and disadvantages, actually. There's losses and gains. There's a death and a life side of getting older. So let's talk first about the losses. Let's get that over with. So first of all, there's status losses. All kinds of status losses. Some people feel like they get invisible, that people don't want to talk to us, don't value what we have to say anymore, don't see us as attractive anymore. And that's a big loss of status. A second kind of loss is career. If we continue to work, are we valued at work still? Are we a respected employee or an ignored employee? Do we become not eligible for promotion anymore because we're too old? If we retire, we lose our status as an employer and an employee. We lose our status as a career person. That can be huge for some people whose identity is greatly bound up in their work, not so much for others who are glad to have it over with or get away. So different people, it hits different people different ways. Our status as parents change. We still have children, but they grow up. And as they grow up, they don't need us anymore in the same way that they did. So the status of parent changes as the kids get older. For some, that's a pretty big loss. For others, again, that can be a relief. Or we can enjoy the new adult-adult relationships with our children. The next thing is diminished physical and mental abilities. I guess I don't have to tell a lot of people here. Some people experience physical pain. More and more people end up having knee and hip replacements. People have back problems. And of course, I think all of us can't remember names and words or what I was about to say. When you have a group of older people around a table, everybody is pulling together to remember names and words with each other. A third thing is the loss of family and friends. People move, they go downhill, they die. My mother-in-law, when she got very old, she looked at a photo of herself with other people, and she said, "I'm the only one in this photo who's still alive." So there can be a loneliness and certainly a huge loss as we lose people. And of those that are left, how many people really understand us? Do young people understand in the same way? And I think it's why I used to say I would never move to a place where only older people live, but I'm beginning to see why people do it, because there's something very comforting about going through this with other people that understand what we're all going through. We're all going through it together. And finally, in terms of losses, our hopes and expectations of what we wanted, but may never be able to accomplish with relationships, with career, some of the things we wanted to do in life. Facing that I haven't and now never will accomplish what I wanted to achieve in life, with work, with relationships, with getting recognition. Daniel Levinson says that a lot of people, when they're older, have what he called delusions about accomplishing great things. And many of us don't end up accomplishing everything we had hoped or expected to accomplish, and we have to face that. So with all these losses to deal with, how can people not be depressed and go into despair? Interestingly, in fact, many people are not depressed. A guy named Brendan Kelly had some research, and actually he did this around the world. And he claims that happiness is actually U-shaped. When he asked everyone, how happy are you? He says there's actually a nadir around age 47, and he claims this is around the world, where people actually have maybe more responsibilities and stresses, but it goes up as life goes on. So if that's true, there must be positives that people are making use of in order not to be weighed down too much by the losses and disappointments. Again, although Buddha's 5 remembrances may be depressing or seem depressing, here's what one follower said about them. The 5 remembrances help us make friends with our fears of getting old, getting sick, being abandoned, and dying. But they are also a bell of mindfulness that can help us appreciate deeply the wonders of life that are available here and now. So this leads very nicely into what are the potential gains of getting older? So first of all, I think there is the possibility of truly appreciating life differently, in a different way. Some people call it a sense of awe. Some people talk about gratefulness for life and for what we have. There's a cliche, you don't know what you have until you lose it. The preciousness of life becomes more apparent when faced with losing it. It can be something that helps us not go down the road of despair. We can value our friends, our relationships, and just life itself. Nature can become more beautiful and appreciative. Secondly, there's the possibility of new statuses, new positive statuses that are based on experience and wisdom. There's the elder statesman, the family matriarch and patriarch, and the mentor. There's a researcher who said that many people begin to run out of new ideas when they get older, but they can change into being a mentor instead. Don't keep insisting that you have new ideas if you're running out of them. You can pivot and do something with the experience that you have instead and still keep a positive status. There's also changed perspectives and priorities. There's a change in what's satisfying to some of us. Often people are less concerned with others, what others will say or think. An example, someone said to me, I don't care so much about success anymore or proving myself professionally. I'm more focused on the journey, the experience, the enjoyment of life. I am off the ambition train. People often begin to think about satisfying themselves and not caring so much about what others think or what they think we should be doing with our lives. Interestingly, I'm on a board and having some problems, and people were saying, you know what? If it isn't fun, don't do it. If you're not enjoying it, don't do it. Do something that you do enjoy. We tend to think, you know what? This is my life. Next is that there is time now for some interests and activities, some old, but some new that we can do. If we have the time, the energy, and the ability, the more intrinsic interests we have, the greater our repertoire, the more we have to choose from to keep being interested and satisfied with life. A friend of mine said the definition of retirement, it's the only time in life when our schedules are our own. So the question of what do we want to do with that is so important now that we actually have more time to do it. And finally, there's self-reflection, a turning inward. This could go badly, of course, but it could go really well. And a lot of people get a lot of satisfaction with taking the time to do just that. So what do people act on when they're faced with limited time? Again, what's real is what we're prepared to act on. Here's a quick, interesting little list here. The top 5 regrets of the dying. This was written by a nurse who was a hospice nurse. And she came up with things that people had told her over the years. 1, I wish I'd had the courage to live a life true to myself, not the life others expected of me. 2, I wish I hadn't worked so hard. 3, I wish I'd had the courage to express my feelings. 4, I wish I'd stayed in touch with friends. And 5, I wish I'd let myself be happier. In our 70s and 80s, looking at this, we still have the time to take a look at all this and take this into account. I'll give you another quote from someone who said, I look for new commitments and pursuits that have nothing to do with my professional career, and I nurture my relationships with the people I love. It's remarkable how short our time on earth is on earth and how important it is to foster those we love as much as we can with that time. I think that's a beautiful, beautiful quote and a beautiful way of looking at things. So there's a sense of, this is my last chance to whatever it is I haven't done or want to do, this is my chance. So here's a list of some things that I think people tend to act on. First of all, it is important to leave a good name. Remember that Hamlet, the last thing he says when he's dying is to Horatio, please clear my name. Nobody wants to leave a bad name. And you know, we do think of what will people say at my funeral? How will I be remembered by my friends and family and by my community? We want to be remembered well. Interestingly, for me, I've noticed this for years, I want my grandchildren to remember me. So I take photos of them, of me, reading to them. And I think of them looking at those photos in the future and saying, that was my grandma and she loved me. Another thing that's really important to people, sorry. They want to leave a legacy. Levinson says, in some ways, everybody really wants some immortality. So a sense of, what handprint will I leave on the world? What difference have I made in the world? So I'll tell you some interesting things from people that I know. One person has a son, and he and his wife are kind of home buddies. They never go anywhere. So she took her son, her grandson, on a trip and said, I'm hoping that I can give to him my love of travel. That's the impact she's hoping to have. Another of mine is someone who's into the arts and culture, and she is taking her grandchildren to ballet and to music, and this is so important to her that she have an impact on her grandchildren. Another aspect of a legacy is leaving a body of work behind that matters. And I have a husband who is still hoping to make and wanting to make a difference in the field of psychology, for instance, and still very into that. Comparing those, I want to mention that I suspect that the first part of leaving an impact on family might be more important to women in general than to men, and the impact of work might sometimes be more important to some men than it might be to women. That's just throw that out to you, see what you think. And finally, what handprint do we leave on the community? For some people who've been active in the community, that is very important to them. And it could be volunteer work, working with organizations, politics, that might continue to be really important to them. Another thing that I've noticed is that there's a powerful urge to express ourselves, to have people know who we really are. And even if it's not public, we still want to express ourselves somehow in some way. And so I've noticed that people often become involved in creative activities. We see people begin to write, to paint, to do photography. Now, in some ways, they have the time to do that they didn't have before. But I also think there is a need to express ourselves that comes out later in life. I connect that to the top 5 regrets of the dying. I wish I'd been more genuine in my life. I think with limited time left, people look for social practices that they see as a genuine expression of themselves. Then work on relationships. When people have problematic relationships, I think it really matters to people so much that they can resolve them if possible. So some of my clients have family members that they're not talking to or aren't talking to them, and they desperately want to do something about that. My mother was as I said, a very dynamic person, but she was also a very difficult person. And she and I had many intense arguments during our lifetime. But I noticed in the last few years when she got older, that when we argued, she would take any chance to get out of that argument. And if I made a joke in the middle of it, if I brought some humor in, she would laugh and let it drop much more just right away. She did not want to go out with big arguments in her life. And I think the time with our children and grandchildren become much more valuable to us, perhaps friends as well. The next thing is just do things that bring satisfaction. Anything that is satisfying our lives is so important. And in connection with that, the last one is doing less of what isn't important, dropping things that aren't important or aren't satisfying to us. So there was a 92-year-old woman I spoke to recently, and she made an interesting comment. She said, you have to keep doing things that are satisfying, because the more you do them, the more you keep doing things that are satisfying instead of letting them go. And I think, especially, I imagine as a 92-year-old, that there's so often times when perhaps you have some aches and pains, you're really tired, it's hard to get up and go. But the more that we do things that are more satisfying to us, the more energy and motivation we have to keep doing those things. And those are just essential. So that brings us to the end.
Don't say that.
Let's see. Yeah. Where's my stop share?
Maybe that brings us to as far as we've gotten.
Boy, that was wonderful. You know, the fact that I turned 70 on October 29th brings a lot of things front and center for me, and I went to Portugal for 17 days to affirm parts of life. But we've got some time now before we do our panel for, you know, some questions, discussions from the audience. Or how about that? Nancy?
So, Laurie, that was really terrific, and I really have been collecting stories from a lot of older people that are special in my life, and unfortunately, I've got a friend who's, I think, in the process of dying, and she's very close to me, and she's been writing to me, you know, every day. She writes little things. I write little things to her when I don't see her, and obviously I can't see her now, but she is savoring things like food or touch right now. And she'll say things like, you know what, everybody's been talking to me about dying. I don't know. I've never done it before. Maybe I am dying. But, you know, I mean, it's really precious, and she's really sweet in the process of dying, which I think she may very well be dying, but who knows, because none of us have done it and everybody does it differently. But I just wanted to say thanks for that. So even towards the end, I think it's really kind of cool that what people can do with their time.
Yeah, Laurie. You're muted. You're muted, Laurie.
Is that better? Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. You know, one thing, we talked about some of the Buddhist concepts and the notion of fear is something, you know, are you afraid to die? And I think that's a big deal. And the thing is, more in Japanese and other Asian cultures, you're respected for your status based on what you know and your willingness to give to the rest of the community in such a way you're never lonely. You there's no question about your status and your role in the community. And you know, I just came back from uh, a trip to Japan for a month visiting family, and everyone we're visiting was 95. My aunt in Wisconsin just died at 95, and I was thinking, well, I'm 75. Um, I'm kind of going to be fluttering off a bit, and then I reconnect with all these people, and I say, well, I got to be ready for the next 20 years. And you know, I think about how what a commitment I have to helping younger therapists. How I go by the Buddhist temple and will watch and then get on the mat and then um, teach dozens of young people the biggest things they're missing, you know, in judo. And then I do that with jujitsu also. And, you know, stay in, you know, pretty good shape. But the main thing is to, it doesn't feel like the end of life chapters. You know, it feels like get your ass going and do what you're supposed to be doing, honoring all the people who gave to you, and you know, in such a way that I don't have any choice. I don't know if that makes sense, but you know, the thing is, um, the whole notion of our having a duty to pass on what Pete taught us about living every day, and you know that I that's the main thing I get from Descriptive and uh, the talk last night, you know, about
Let me
using,
interrupt and because I
about
would
using
like to
Descriptive
hear.
in everyday life. Go ahead,
Yeah.
what?
Yeah, no, I just want to interrupt because we just have limited time, I know, and I wanted to just see if anyone else had anything else.
Okay, I'm sorry, but
That's
that's
okay.
what I went on and say.
I appreciate that. And
Yeah,
as I'm aware, our society is really different that way as well.
yeah.
I have some thoughts in terms of aging. Not that it's what I've read about. I haven't experienced it at all.
Right.
Um, I think it's and a lot of it has been hell in terms of anxieties and this and that and dealing with losses of dear people, potential losses of dear people, and losses of people's functioning and all that and what that does. But in my my experience is that it's such a privilege to live long enough to have a sense of what life is about. And you can't have that without the whole picture. It's the tapestry is so much fuller now, and and it's so rich and it's so wonderful. And you also have as for me personally, it's a gut cellular sense of the importance of loving, not being loved, but loving. That's just such a wonderful experience. I so it's just a privilege to have a sense for yourself of what life is about and the purpose of life, and wrapping up that tapestry, and being so grateful to have the experience of the whole thing. So it's really precious. And that's paradoxical in some ways, but it just really feels like us, in that sense, a very special, wonderful privilege.
Kim, you had your hand up?
Thanks, Walter. Or Ralph, I want to say, first of all, Laurie, thank you so much for giving this talk. I'm someone who's a little bit younger in this audience, however, a parent, an older parent with young kids, and a child of older parents. And I really appreciate what you've said and what Carolyn Zeiger always reminds me of, and trying to use these things at a younger age and sharing them with clients. She always tells me, do more by doing less. And she also always asks me when I'm helping with a few things for her, are you really enjoying this? And those things really resonate with me. And, you know, our generation starting these things younger, why do we need to wait until we're in our 70s or 80s to start thinking about these things? Of course, it depends on your circumstances and where you are in your life, but I think these are really important premises to start now. So thanks to both of you.
Yeah, absolutely. So if we only knew back then what we know now, right? We always say that, but it's true. We should be living a lot of these that much earlier.
Really?
Yeah, I'll get the bad news over first. As the oldest person here, I feel obligated to speak. Joe, either last year or year before, had quite a bit to say about the way people see you and treat you, and that's the bad news. I find that my family members want me to live forever and believe I'm in much better shape than I really am. This is not helpful. You ride with it. You haven't got much choice. And other people see you as much weaker than you are, and they want to hold my hand to take me across the street. I was in the DIA going to a wedding in Portland 2 years ago. And I went up and I said, I'm terribly sorry, I'm pretty deaf. So if you have a hard time dealing with me, just keep repeating if I ask you to. So I got checked in, I got my luggage checked in, and she said, and your wheelchair is over there, ma'am. And I said, oh, that's so nice of you. I think I'd really rather walk to the gate. Yeah, I'm seeing other people nodding their heads. This was really excellent, Laurie. I really appreciate it. I took down some things and underlined a few, and I want to talk a little bit about my accidental good luck, aside from being healthier than I deserve to be at this point. I started I think the Christian name is a fellowship group. In Hebrew, it's Havarah, when I was 87. And they're still with me, and they're much younger than me, because that's why I started the group.
When you were 87 years old or 1987?
They were obviously
1987. Which you
1987 I started. They were obviously lost young Jews who didn't like the synagogues, but wanted something. So I luckily was able to get them together, and luckily they are still here 40 some years later, 30 some. I don't know. Anyhow, they're still here, and they are a huge resource. When my dentist retired, I have now outlived several dentists.
You know you're getting old when you outlive your dentist. Several of them.
And said, who's a good dentist? Couple of them named this person. I now have terrific dentists. They are.
I'm gonna interrupt because when we start going on and on, I think we are getting really late on this, so I'm not sure how much time we have.
I do not. So did they, and that they stayed with me. I had a little other good luck, but I won't tell you about it.
Okay, we got split a little late, so we're gonna split the difference, so maybe 3 more minutes. It's down for an hour, but I. No.
40 minutes, 40.
So let's go for a couple more minutes, then we'll shift gears into the panel.
Just an observation as I'm listening. There's a nasty trap lurking in the phrase end of life. Talking as though nearing the end of our lives, as Laurie said, the last stages of our lives. Well, in one way that's so, and in one way, it's pathogenically deceptive. How's that for a phrase?
You mean deceptively pathogenic?
No, pathogenically deceptive.
Okay.
Exactly. The one thing that Laurie said really struck me right on target. I really liked it. And which is the other half of it, is when you're young, that you're going to die isn't real. Eventually, for most people, at some point, it becomes real that you'll die. But that's very different from thinking in terms of there is a date at which you will die. The truth is, we don't know, we can't know, but there's a tendency, I guess it's cultural, but I don't know, it's sort of in the air, to think, well, I've got so many years left, so I'm nearing the end of my life. It's not true. None of us knows. So rather than the last stages of our lives, I think it's far better, it certainly works for me anyway, to think in terms of the next stage. When is your life gonna end? You don't know.
Yes.
But it helps a great deal to work on your capacity for tolerating uncertainty and ambiguity.
And change.
And change. But the trap is to think, oh, well, gee, I probably got 10, I'm 70, how old am I, 76? I probably got 10 years. That's the nasty trap. That's the jaws, like lurking, waiting for you. I don't have any goddamn idea how many years I've got left. So I might as well do everything I can now. And I guess I'll find out when the end comes. But it's a really bad idea to think in terms of I've got a fixed number left. And I guess I'm trying to say that that's the trap. And I'm recommending avoiding that trap.
Joe, my son died at the age of 18.
Oh.
And he knew he was gonna die. And he said, and he wrote in his journal, I don't want to live my life like I'm dying. I want to live it like I'm fully alive. He's lived that way. And the thing that was so interesting about the last year and a half of his life, knowing that he was dying, there was a depth of maturity and soulfulness that showed up for him because he was living his life, not as if he were dying.
That's brilliant.
But the fact that but he also knew he was dying, and that also deepened him, I think, as a person. Yeah,
Sure.
I'm looking at our time, it's probably time to wrap up. I remember one comment that somebody shared with me about this meeting, but he has passed away, is tomorrow's not promised. And living your life with the idea that ultimately you live it now, so keep your long-term perspectives, but still you live it now and maximize your behavior. Thanks, everybody.